There's hardly a sentient grown-up in this country who isn't aware that our economy is no longer working for vast numbers of everyday people. The rich and powerful have more wealth and power than ever. Everyone else keeps losing ground. Between 2009 and 2011 alone, income fell for the 99%, while it rose 11% for the top 1%. Since the worst of the financial crisis, all of the economic growth has gone to the top 1%, while the rest of the country has floundered. Stunning, isn't it? The behavior of many of those 1%ers brought on the financial crisis in the first place. We turned around and rescued them, and now their wealth is skyrocketing once again. At the bottom, working people are practically flat on their back. President Obama has finally recognized they need help. In his State of the Union, he proposed an increase in the minimum wage.
Tonight, let's declare that in the wealthiest nation on earth, no one who works full-time should have to live in poverty, and raise the federal minimum wage to $9 an hour.
But as the economist Dean Baker points out this week, if the minimum wage had risen in step with productivity growth, it would be over $16.50 an hour today. We talk a lot about what's happening to the middle class, but the American dream's really become a nightmare for the poor. Just about everyone has an opinion about the trouble we're in. The blame game is at fever pitch in Washington, where obstinate Republicans and hapless Democrats once again play kick the can with the problems we face. You wish they would just stop and listen to Richard Wolfe, an attentive and systematic observer of capitalism and democracy. He taught economics for 25 years at the University of Massachusetts and has published books such as Democracy at Work, Occupy the Economy, and Capitalism Hits the Fan, The Global Economic Meltdown, and What to Do About It. He's now a visiting professor at the New School here in New York City, where he's teaching a special course on the financial crash. Welcome, Richard Wolfe.
Thank you, Bill.
Last night I watched for the second time the popular lecture that is on this DVD, Capitalism Hits the Fan. Tell us why you say capitalism has hit the fan.
Well, the classic defense of capitalism as a system for much of its history has been, okay, it has this or that flaw, but it, quote unquote, delivers the goods.
Yeah, for most everybody. That was
right.
The argument.
And so you may not get the most, but it'll trickle down to you all the different ways.
The yachts will rise.
That's right. The ocean will lift all the boats. The reality is that for at least 30 years now, that isn't true. For the majority of people, capitalism is not delivering the goods. It is delivering, arguably, the bads. And so we have this disparity getting wider and wider between those for whom capitalism continues to deliver the goods, by all means, but a growing majority in the society which isn't getting the benefit, is in fact facing harder and harder times, and that's what provokes some of us to begin to say it's a systemic problem.
So we put together some recent headlines. The merger of American and U.S. Air giving us only 4 major airlines and less competition. Comcast buying NBC Universal, also reducing competition. The very wealthy getting a trivial increase in taxes, while the payroll tax of working people will go from 4.2% to 6.2%. Colossal salaries escalating again, many subsidized by taxpayers. The Postal Service ending service on Saturday. What's the picture you get from that montage of headlines?
Well, for me, it is captured by the European word austerity. We're basically saying that even though the widening gap between rich and poor built us up many of the factors that plunged us into a crisis, instead of dealing with them and fixing that problem, we're actually allowing the crisis to make the inequality worse. The latest research from the leading 2 economists, Saez from the University of California in Berkeley,
right,
and Piketty in France, confirms that even over the last 5 years of the crisis, through 2012, the inequality of wealth and income has gotten worse, as though we determined not to deal with it. All of those headlines you talked about are more of that. I mean, the astonishing capacity to make it harder for people to have a delivery of their mail on Saturday, to save what is, in a larger picture, a trivial amount of money, but that will really impact. Thousands of people will lose their jobs, Everyone will lose a service that is important, particularly in smaller places around the United States that are not served by anything comparable to the post office. And then, as you pointed out, and I have to say a word about it, this amazing display in which we raise the top income tax on the richest people from 35 to 39.6%, only for those over $450,000 a year. While for the 150 million Americans who get a weekly or monthly check, their payroll tax went up a whopping 48% from 4.2 to 6. This is so grotesque an inequality that you're watching a process that is sort of spinning out of control, in which those at the top have no limits, don't recognize any constraint on how far they can take it.
If workers at the bottom get the increase in the minimum wage that President Obama proposed in his State of the Union message, they will still be faring less well than their counterparts did 50 years ago.
That's right.
What does that say to you?
The peak for the minimum wage in terms of its real purchasing power was 1968. It's been basically declining with a couple of ups and downs ever since. So that if you adjust for the current price, the minimum wage was about $10.50 roughly back in 1968 in terms of what it could buy, and it's $7.25 today in terms of what it can buy. So you've taken the folks at the bottom, the people who work hard, full-time jobs, and you've made their economic condition worse over a 50-year period while wealth has accumulated at the top. What kind of a society does this? And then the arguments that come out, which are in my profession a major staple for many careers, are arguments that, gee, if you raise the minimum wage, a few people who might have otherwise gotten a job won't get it because the employer doesn't want to pay the higher wage. Well, if that logic is really going to play in your mind, then you should keep lowering the wage. Because if you only made it $4 an hour, just think how many more people could get a job, but a job under conditions that make life impossible.
Who decided that workers at the bottom should fall behind?
Well, in the end, it's the society as a whole that tolerates it. But it was Congress's decision and Congress's power to raise the minimum wage, as has happened from time to time. Even this time, not to be too critical of our president, but when he was running for office, he proposed a $9.50 minimum wage. Here we are in the beginning of his second term, and something has happened to make him only propose a $9 minimum wage. So even he is scaling down, perhaps for political reasons, what he thinks he can accomplish. When, if we just wanted to get it back to what it was in 1968, it would have to be $10 or $11 an hour.
And many economists say we just can't do that because it would be devastating.
Well, the truth of the matter is that there's an immense economics literature. I'm a professional economics person, so I've read it. And the literature goes like this. On the one hand, there may be some jobs that are lost because an employer, having to pay a higher minimum wage, will not hire people or will hire fewer. That will happen in some cases. But against that, you have to weigh something else. If the 15 million, that's the estimate of the White House, the 15 million American workers whose wages will go up if we raise the minimum wage, we have to count also the question, those people will now have a higher income. They will spend more money. And when they spend more money on goods and services, that will create jobs for people to produce those goods and services. In order to understand the effect of raising the minimum wage, you can't only look at what will be done by some employers in the face of a higher wage in lowering the employment. You have to look at all the other effects. And when the economists have done that, economists from a wide range of political perspectives, you know what they end up with? There's not much effect. In other words, the two things net each other out. And so there isn't much of a change in the employment situation overall. To which my response is, okay, let's assume that's correct. At the very least, though, we have transformed the lives of 15 million American working people and their families from one of impossible to get most of what America offers to a situation where at least you're closer to a decent minimum life.
Are you suggesting then that there is no economic reason why those at the bottom should not share in the gains of economic growth?
Absolutely. There is no economic reason. And in fact, I would go further. We know, for example, that the lower the income of a family, the more likely it is to cut corners on the education of their children because they don't have the resources. So here's an unmeasurable question about the minimum wage. How many young people who are born into a minimum wage family that is so low as we have it today will never get the kinds of educational opportunities, the kinds of educational supports to be able to realize their own capabilities and to contribute to our society? That alone is a reason, whether you think of it in terms of the long-term benefit of the country, or you just approach it as a moral question or an ethical question. By what right do you condemn a whole generation of young people to be born into families whose financial circumstances make so much of what they need to become real citizens impossible?
You remind me of something that President Obama said in his second inaugural address. Quote, "We are true to our creed.
We are true to our creed when a little girl born into the bleakest poverty knows that she has the same chance to succeed as anybody else because she is an American, she is free, and she is equal not just in the eyes of God, but also in our own."
That's eloquent, but hardly true.
That's right. And it's painful for some of us to hear that because it is so obviously untrue. It is so obviously contradicted by the realities, not just of those who work at the minimum wage, but all of those who work at or even at 50% above what we call the poverty level. Because when you look at what families like that can actually afford, they have to deny huge parts of the American dream to their children and to themselves as a necessary consequence of where they are put. And I don't need to be an economist to put it as starkly as I know how. We can read every day that in the major cities of the United States, apartments are changing hands for $10, $20, $30, $40 million. People have enormous yachts that they cruise. We all see it. We all know it. We even celebrate it as a nation. How does that square with millions of people in a position where they can't provide even the most basic services and opportunities? We don't have equality of opportunity because there is no shortcut. If you want equality of opportunity, you're going to have to create equality of income and wealth much closer to a genuine equality than anything. We're going in the other direction. And so I agree with you. It's stark if our president talks about something so divergent from the reality.
When study after study has exposed the myth that this is a land of opportunity, how does the myth keep getting perpetuated?
Well, my wife is a psychotherapist, and so I ask her that question often, and here's what she says to me. Often, people cling all the harder to an idea precisely because the reality is so different and becoming more different. In other words, I would answer, the myth of equal opportunity is more attractive, more beautiful, more something people want to hold on, the more they know it's slipping away. And they would like to believe that this president or any president who says it might somehow bring it back.
When you say that there's no economic argument that people should be kept at should not share in the gains of economic growth, the response is, well, that's what the market bears.
Well, you know, in the history of economics, which is my profession, it's a standard play on words. Instead of talking about how the economy is shaped by the actions of consumers in one way, workers in another way, corporate executives in another way, we abstract from all of that and we create a myth or a mystique. It's called the market. That way you're absolving everybody from responsibility. It isn't that you're doing this, making that decision in this way. It's rather this thing called the market that makes things happen. Well, every corporate executive I know knows that half of his or her job is to tweak, manipulate, shift, and change the market. No corporate executive takes the market as given. That may happen in the classroom, but not in the world of real business. That's what advertising is. You try to create the demand if there isn't enough of it to make money without doing that. You change everything you can. So the reference to a market, I think, is an evasion. It's an attempt to make abstract the real workings of the economy so nobody can question what this one or that one is doing. But let me take it another way. To say that it's the market is another way of saying it's our economic system that works that way. That is a very dangerous defense move to take.
Why?
Because it plays into the hands of those like me who are critical of the system. If indeed it isn't this one or that one, it isn't this company's strategy or that product's maneuver, but it is the market, the totality of the system that is producing unconscionable results, multi-million-dollar apartments next door to abject poverty, then you're saying that the system is at fault for these results. I agree with that, but I'm not sure that those who push this notion of the market makes it happen have thought through where the logic of that defense makes them very vulnerable to a much more profound critique than they will be comfortable with.